The button fell into the Wyoming dust, just as Martha Reynolds bent to lift her daughter's hand from the mercantile steps, and she knew with absolute certainty that her coat would not make it through another winter intact. It was November of 1881 in Lusk, Wyoming territory, and the wind already carried ice in its teeth. Martha stood frozen on the wooden planks outside Henderson's general store, watching that little circle of bone roll between the boots of passing miners and ranch hands until it disappeared beneath the water trough. Her daughter Clara, just turned 4, tugged at her threadbare sleeve and asked in that sweet questioning voice why Mama looked so sad about a button. "It's nothing, darling," Martha said, forcing brightness into her words though her chest felt tight. "We'll find another." But they both knew that was not true. Buttons cost money, and money was something the Reynolds household had not seen much of since Thomas died in the mine collapse 2 springs past. Martha made do with sewing and mending for the other families in town, but winter always came hard and fast in Wyoming, and her clients were fewer now that Mrs. Henderson had started taking in work at better rates. The older woman had a husband still living, after all, and could afford to charge less. Martha gathered her skirts in Clara's small hand and stepped into the store, the bell above the door announcing their arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt at odds with the knot in her stomach. She needed thread anyway, and perhaps Mr. Henderson would have a jar of mismatched buttons somewhere that he might sell cheap. The store smelled of coffee and leather, and the sawdust spread across the floor, familiar scents that usually brought comfort but today just reminded her of all the things she could not afford to buy. "Mrs. Reynolds," Mr. Henderson called from behind the counter where he was measuring out nails for a customer. "Be with you in just a moment." Martha nodded and guided Clara toward the fabric section, letting her daughter's fingers trail over the bolts of calico and muslin that they would not be purchasing today. The little girl had Thomas's dark hair and his gentle brown eyes, and sometimes looking at her was like staring into the past and future all at once. Martha straightened her spine. She would not let her daughter go cold this winter, even if it meant sewing every hour the Lord gave her until her fingers bled. The bell jingled again, and Martha glanced up out of habit. A man entered, tall and lean in the way of men who spent their lives on horseback, with trail dust coating his dark coat and chaps. He removed his hat as he crossed the threshold, revealing hair the color of wheat fields in late summer, and his eyes swept the store with the careful attention of someone accustomed to marking details. Those eyes were an unusual shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the prairie, and when they landed briefly on Martha, she felt something flutter in her chest that she firmly pushed down. She was a widow with a child and no business noticing the color of strange men's eyes. "Help you, Mr. Henderson asked, having finished with his previous customer. "Yates Quinlan," the man said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of someone raised further south, though not so thick as to be Texan. "I'm looking for the Bar 7 ranch. Heard in Cheyenne they might be hiring." "Bar 7's about 8 miles north," Henderson replied, "though I cannot say about the hiring. Winters are hard up there, and old Samuel Cross usually keeps a skeleton crew through the cold months." Yates nodded slowly, and Martha saw something tighten around his mouth that suggested this was not the news he hoped to hear. He had the weathered look of a man who had covered long miles recently, and she wondered what circumstances had brought him north this late in the year when most drovers were settling into bunkhouses or heading back south to Texas. "Appreciate the information," Yates said. "I'll need some supplies before I head out. Coffee, beans, tobacco if you've got it." Martha turned her attention back to Clara, who had found the button jar she remembered seeing on her last visit. It sat on a lower shelf, a large glass container filled with an assortment of buttons in every size and material. Most were common enough, but her daughter had unerringly picked out the few fancy ones, carved bone and polished horn that would cost more than Martha could spare. "Mama, these are pretty," Clara whispered, holding up a set of 4 matching brown buttons that would actually suit Martha's dark gray coat perfectly. "They are, sweetheart, but we need to find something less dear." "Those there are 15 cents for the set," Mr. Henderson called over. He had a kind face, but business was business. "I could do 12 cents since you're a regular customer, Mrs. Reynolds." 12 cents. Martha had 20 cents in her reticule, meant for thread and perhaps a small bag of sugar if she could manage it. She opened her mouth to ask about the mismatched buttons when Clara's grip on her hand suddenly tightened. "Mama, I do not feel good." Martha looked down and her heart lurched. Clara's face had gone pale except for 2 bright spots of color high on her cheeks, and her eyes had taken on a glassy sheen. Martha pressed the back of her hand to her daughter's forehead and felt heat radiating from her skin like a coal stove. "Oh, Clara," she breathed, and suddenly buttons and thread meant nothing at all. "Mr. Henderson, I need to take her home. I'll come back another time." She was already moving toward the door, gathering Clara into her arms despite the fact that the child was getting too big to carry far. Clara whimpered and pressed her hot face against Martha's shoulder, and Martha's mind raced through her limited medicine supplies at home. Willow bark tea, cool cloths, prayers. She pushed through the door and nearly collided with someone on the steps. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her, and she looked up into those storm cloud eyes. "Pardon me, madam," Yates said, releasing her immediately and stepping back. Then his gaze dropped to Clara and his expression shifted. "Your little one all right?" "Fever," Martha said shortly, adjusting her grip on Clara. "Excuse me, I need to get her home." She started down the steps, but her boot caught on her hem and she stumbled. Yates moved fast, catching her elbow and helping her regain her balance. Clara had started to cry softly, and Martha felt the hot sting of tears in her own eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "Not here, not in front of strangers." "Where do you live?" Yates asked. "Let me help you carry her." "That is not necessary," Martha began, but Clara chose that moment to be sick down the front of Martha's already shabby coat, and suddenly accepting help seemed less like weakness and more like necessity. 2 streets over. The little house with blue shutters, though the paint's mostly gone. Yates did not wait for further permission. He simply lifted Clara from Martha's arms with surprising gentleness, settling her against his shoulder as if he had done such things before. Clara was too miserable to protest the stranger, and Martha was too worried to argue further. She led the way through Lusk's dusty streets, acutely aware of the curious looks from neighbors who saw the widow Reynolds walking alongside a strange cowboy carrying her sick child. The house was exactly as Martha had described it, small and weathered, with a narrow porch and windows that rattled in the wind. She hurried ahead to open the door, gesturing Yates inside to the main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once. A doorway led to the single bedroom that Martha and Clara shared, and she quickly turned down the quilts on the bed. "Here, please," she said, and Yates carried Clara into the bedroom and laid her gently on the mattress. The child had gone quiet now, her eyes closed and her breathing rapid and shallow. Martha immediately set about removing Clara's shoes and dress, covering her with a light sheet. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the fear crawling up her spine. Children died of fevers in Wyoming territory. Everyone knew someone who had lost a little one to illness. She pushed the thought away and focused on what needed doing. When she returned to the main room, Yates was still there, standing somewhat awkwardly near the door with his hat in his hands. Their eyes met, and Martha suddenly remembered her manners. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Quinlan. It was kind of you." "Just Yates is fine, madam, and it was nothing." He hesitated, then added, "I've got some willow bark in my saddlebag if you're running short. Good for bringing down fever." Martha wanted to refuse on principle. She barely knew this man, and accepting charity had always stuck in her throat even when Thomas was alive. But Clara came first always. "I would appreciate that," she said quietly. "And it's Martha Reynolds." Yates nodded and put his hat back on. "I'll fetch it from my horse. Be right back." He was gone before Martha could say anything else, the door closing softly behind him. She stood in the middle of her small home, listening to Clara's labored breathing from the bedroom, and wondered what kind of cowboy carried willow bark in his saddlebags. Most men she knew carried whiskey and tobacco, and little else. True to his word, Yates returned within minutes carrying a small cloth bag that he handed to Martha. She opened it and found good quality willow bark, more than she would have been able to afford at the apothecary. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. "Nothing. I can get more." "I insist on paying, and I insist you do not." His voice was firm but not unkind. "Use it for your daughter. That's payment enough." Martha's throat tightened. She was not accustomed to such casual generosity, not anymore. People in Lusk were good folk, but everyone had their own troubles, and the widow Reynolds was just one more mouth scraping by. She managed a nod. "I need to make tea," she said. "The stove takes a minute to heat." She moved to the cast iron stove, grateful for something to do with her hands. Yates should leave now, she thought. He had done his good deed and she had thanked him, and surely he needed to get to the bar 7 before dark. But when she glanced over her shoulder, he was still there, and he was looking at her coat where she had hung it on the peg by the door. "That's the button you lost," he said. "At the Mercantile, I saw it fall." Martha's face heated. Of course he had seen. Probably everyone had seen, the poor widow who could not even keep her coat together. "It is nothing, I'll manage." Yates was quiet for a moment, and when Martha turned fully to face him, she found him studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "The job at Bar 7 might not pan out," he said slowly. "I was wondering if there might be other work in town. Do you know of any?" "Why are you asking me? You live here. Figured you would know better than most." It was a reasonable answer, though Martha had the distinct feeling there was more to it. She filled the kettle and set it on the stove, buying herself time to think. "The Johnson Ranch sometimes needs hands. The Silver Star Saloon usually needs someone to muck stables. And if you are handy with repairs, half the buildings in Lusk need work before winter settles in hard." "I can do repairs," Yates said. "Carpentry, some smithing, general fixing. Learned from my father back in Missouri." That explained the slight drawl. Martha added bark to the steeping pot, measuring carefully. "Mrs. Chen at the boarding house keeps a list of folks looking for work done. You might check there." "I'll do that, thank you." He should leave now. Martha waited for him to turn toward the door, but instead he shifted his weight and said, "I also know how to sew on buttons." Martha's hands stilled on the kettle. She turned slowly, searching his face for mockery but finding none. "That is an unusual skill for a cowboy." "Learned that from my mother. She always said a man who cannot take care of his own belongings is not much of a man." He gestured toward her coat. "I owe you for the information about work. Let me sew your buttons before I go, save you the trouble." "I do not have buttons to sew," Martha heard herself say. "That is why I was at the Mercantile. Then I'll get you some." Before Martha could protest, he added, "Consider it payment for the intelligence about Mrs. Chen. Information's worth something out here." It was foolish to accept. She did not know this man, and there was something unnerving about the way he seemed to see straight through her pride to the need underneath. But Clara coughed from the bedroom, and Martha's resolve crumbled. If she was going to spend the next few days nursing her daughter, having a proper coat would help. Winter did not wait for pride. "The brown ones," she said quietly. "The set of 4 that Clara was looking at, they would fit the coat." Yates nodded once and was gone again, leaving Martha alone with her racing thoughts and the kettle beginning to whistle. She poured the hot water over the willow bark and carried the steeping tea into the bedroom, where she spent the next 20 minutes coaxing Clara to drink small sips. The child's fever had not broken, but it did not seem to be rising either, which Martha took as a small mercy. She was bathing Clara's face with cool water when she heard the front door open. Yates's boots were quiet on the wooden floor, but she heard him moving around her main room, and then the soft scrape of a chair being pulled close to where her coat hung. Martha checked that Clara was sleeping, then stepped to the doorway where she could keep watch over her daughter and see into the other room. Yates had indeed purchased the brown buttons, and he had also acquired needle and thread. He sat in Martha's rocking chair with her coat spread across his lap, and his large, work-roughened hands were moving with surprising delicacy as he sewed the first button into place. The afternoon light slanted through the window and turned his hair to gold, and Martha found herself staring at the concentration on his face, the way his mouth pressed into a thin line as he worked. "You do not have to do this," she said softly. He did not look up. "I know." "Then why are you?" Now he did glance at her, those storm eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because sometimes we all need help, and there is no shame in accepting it." Martha wanted to argue that point. She had spent 2 years learning to stand on her own feet, to provide for Clara without leaning on anyone. Pride was sometimes all she had left. But watching Yates sew buttons onto her coat with steady, patient stitches, she felt something crack open inside her chest. Not attraction, she told herself firmly, just gratitude, just the relief of not being alone for a moment. "Your daughter's name is Clara?" Yates asked after a few minutes of silence. "Yes, she's 4, just turned last month. She has your eyes. Your late husband's hair, though, I'd wager." Martha nodded, not trusting her voice. Speaking of Thomas always made her throat tight, even after 2 years. Yates seemed to understand because he did not press further, just continued his careful work. The second button went on, then the third. "How long have you been in Lusk?" he asked eventually. 6 years. Thomas brought me here from Ohio. He heard the mines were paying well." Martha leaned against the doorframe, keeping half an eye on Clara's sleeping form. "They were for a while until the collapse. I'm sorry. So am I." The words came out more bitter than she intended. Sorry and angry and tired of being both. Yates tied off the third button and started on the fourth. Anger's better than despair. Anger keeps you moving. There was something in his voice that made Martha look at him more closely. "You sound like a man familiar with both. Most folks are, they live long enough." He finished the last button and bit the thread to break it, then held up the coat to examine his work. The buttons sat evenly spaced, each one secure and straight. "This should hold you through winter at least." Martha crossed the room and took the coat from him, running her fingers over the new buttons. They were perfect, exactly what she had needed, and the stitching was better than she could have done herself. "Thank you, truly." Yates stood, unfolding his considerable height in her small room. "You're welcome. I should be getting on to bar 7 before full dark." "Wait." Martha moved to the shelf where she kept her meager food stores and pulled down a wrapped bundle. "It's not much, just corn bread from yesterday, but if you are riding out now, you should have something." He accepted the offering with a small smile that transformed his face from stern to something warmer. "Appreciate it, Martha." The use of her given name sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. She walked him to the door, coat still draped over her arm, and stood on the porch as he mounted a rangy bay gelding that had been waiting patiently at her fence. The sun was lowering toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. "If the bar 7 does not work out," Martha heard herself say, "Mrs. Chen really does keep that list, and there is always work for a man willing to do it." Yates settled his hat lower against the angle of the sun. "Might take you up on that. And Martha, I hope your daughter feels better soon." "Thank you." She watched him ride north out of town, dust rising from his horse's hooves until he was just a dark shape against the dying light. Then she went back inside, hung her newly repaired coat on its peg, and returned to her sick daughter's bedside. Clara's fever raged through the night. Martha dozed in the chair beside the bed, waking every hour to give her daughter more willow bark tea and bathe her burning skin with cool water. By dawn, Clara was delirious, calling for her father and crying about monsters in the walls, and Martha seriously considered swallowing her pride and asking Dr. Morrison to come, even though she could not afford his fees. But by mid-morning, after Martha had prayed every prayer she knew and made bargains with God that she hoped he would not hold her to, the fever finally broke. Clara opened her eyes, clear and focused for the first time in nearly 18 hours, and asked for water in a thin but steady voice. Martha cried then, silently, as she held the cup to her daughter's lips. Relief made her hands shake so badly that water sloshed over the rim, and Clara patted her arm with one small hand. "Don't cry, Mama, I'm all right." "I know, darling, I know you are." Martha wiped her eyes and smoothed Clara's sweat-damp hair back from her forehead. "You gave me quite a scare." "I'm hungry." Martha laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "That is a good sign. Let me make you some broth." She spent the rest of the day keeping Clara comfortable and coaxing food into her. The little girl was weak but recovering, and by evening she was sitting up in bed playing with her rag doll and chattering about the dream she had had where Papa came to visit and told her to listen to Mama and drink her tea. Martha sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted but grateful, and wondered if Thomas really had visited their daughter somehow. She did not know what she believed about such things anymore. Prayer had not saved her husband, but it seemed to have saved Clara, or perhaps that was just the willow bark. The willow bark that Yates Quinlan had given her. She thought about the cowboy as she tucked Clara in for the night, remembering the careful way he had sewn those buttons, the lack of judgment in his eyes when he saw her shabby home and worn clothing. Most men would have done their good deed and moved on without a second thought. Yates had stayed, had spent his own money on buttons and thread, had sat in her house sewing like it was the most natural thing in the world. Martha shook her head at herself as she finally lay down beside Clara, too tired to even undress properly. It had been kindness, nothing more, the sort of thing decent people did for each other. She would probably never see Yates Quinlan again. He would find work at the bar 7 or somewhere else, and she would go back to her sewing and scraping by. And in a few months, she would barely remember his name. Sleep took her quickly, and she dreamed of storm-colored eyes and steady hands stitching pieces back together. 3 days later, Martha was hanging washing on the line behind her house when she heard boots on her front porch. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and hurried around the side of the house, expecting one of her sewing clients, but finding instead Yates Quinlan standing by her door with his hat in his hands. "Mr. Quinlan," she said, surprised, "I thought you would be at the bar 7 by now." "Position was filled before I got there," he said. "Figured I would take your advice about Mrs. Chen's list." Martha nodded slowly, taking in details she had missed before. His clothes were worn but clean, carefully mended in several places. His boots had seen hard use but were well oiled. This was a man who took care of what he had, who understood the value of making things last. "Did you find work?" she asked. "Some. Fixed a fence for the Johnsons yesterday, and I'm helping repair the church roof tomorrow. Mrs. Chen says there's enough small jobs to keep me busy a few weeks at least." He paused. I wanted to check on Clara, see if she was feeling better. The fact that he remembered her daughter's name did something odd to Martha's chest. "She's much better, thank you. The fever broke the next morning." "Your willow bark helped. Glad to hear it." Yates shifted his weight, and Martha realized he seemed uncertain, which was at odds with the confident way he had handled everything a few days ago. "I also wanted to ask if you might know of a place to stay. The boarding house is full up, and I have been sleeping in the livery stable. It's fine for now, but when the real cold comes." Martha should not offer. It was improper, and people would talk, and she had Clara to think about. But her mouth opened, and the words came out anyway. "I have a shed out back. It is not much, just storage mostly, but it has 4 walls and a roof that does not leak too badly. If you wanted to clean it out and make it weatherproof, you could stay there. I cannot pay you, but I would not charge rent either." Yates looked at her for a long moment, and Martha could not decipher his expression. Finally he said, "That would not be proper, me staying on your property." "No, it would not," Martha agreed. "But proper does not keep a person warm, and I suspect we could both use the help. You could do repairs around the place in exchange for the space. Lord knows there's plenty that needs fixing. People will talk. People already talk. I'm a widow, which means I'm either an object of pity or suspicion depending on who's doing the talking." Martha lifted her chin. "I've stopped concerning myself with gossip. I concern myself with keeping my daughter fed and warm. If you staying in my shed helps accomplish that by getting my windows properly sealed before winter, then that is what matters." A smile tugged at the corner of Yates's mouth. "You're a practical woman, Martha Reynolds. I'm a poor woman with a child to raise. Practical is all I can afford to be. All right then. I'll take you up on the offer with thanks, and I'll start on those windows today if you have the materials." "I have some old wood planks and a bit of tar paper. It will have to do." They walked around to the back of the house together, Clara following them with her rag doll clutched in her arms. The little girl had attached herself to Yates the moment she saw him, apparently remembering him through her fever haze as the nice man who carried her. She peppered him with questions as they inspected the shed. "Are you a real cowboy? Do you have a gun? Have you ever seen Indians? Do you know how to do rope tricks?" Yates answered each question with patience, explaining that yes, he was a cowboy. Yes, he had a gun, but it was for protection, not for showing off. Yes, he had met many Indians, and most were good people just like everyone else. And no, he did not know any rope tricks, but he could teach her to tie some useful knots if her mama said it was all right. Martha listened to them talk as she examined the shed. It was larger than she had remembered, perhaps 12 feet by 10, with a small window that still had glass in it. Years of accumulated junk filled the space, old furniture that Thomas had meant to repair, broken tools, and empty crates. It would take work to make it livable, but it was possible. "I'll help you clear it out," she offered, "and I have some extra quilts that are too worn for the bed but would serve for a wall hanging to keep out drafts." "I've got my bedroll and some supplies," Yates said. "Won't need much else. I'm used to rough living." They spent the rest of the afternoon working on the shed, Martha and Yates hauling out junk while Clara played nearby. It was hard work, but Martha found herself enjoying it in a way she had not enjoyed anything in a long time. There was something companionable about working alongside someone toward a common goal, something that reminded her of the early days with Thomas, when they had first arrived in Lusk, and everything was new and full of possibility. By evening the shed was empty and swept clean, and Yates had already identified what repairs were most urgent. Martha made a simple supper of beans and cornbread, and she invited Yates to eat with them at her small table. He accepted with thanks, and they ate as the sun set and Clara told elaborate stories about her doll's adventures. "She has quite the imagination," Yates observed when Clara finally wound down. "She gets it from Thomas," Martha said. "He was always spinning tales, making the ordinary sound magical." "Sounds like he was a good man." "He was." Martha stood and began clearing dishes. "He was also reckless and stubborn and too proud to admit when he was in over his head. But yes, he was good." She had not meant to sound so sharp, but grief and anger were still tangled up inside her like briars. Thomas had been warned that the mine was dangerous, that corners were being cut, but he had needed the money and convinced himself it would be fine. And then it was not fine, and Martha was left to pick up the pieces. Yates helped her with the dishes without being asked, standing beside her at the basin while Clara curled up in the rocking chair with her doll. The domestic simplicity of it made Martha's throat tight. This was how it should have been, her and Thomas working together to build a life. Instead here she was with a stranger, and it felt both wrong and strangely right all at once. "I should let you get Clara to bed," Yates said when the last dish was dried. "Thank you for the meal. Best food I've had in weeks." "You must have been eating poorly then," Martha said, but she smiled to take the sting from the words. "Tomorrow I'll make a proper stew if you can spare time to help me move the woodpile closer to the house." "I can do that." He collected his hat and gear and headed out to the shed, and Martha got Clara ready for bed. As she tucked the quilts around her daughter, Clara said, "I like Mr. Quinlan, Mama. He's nice." "He is," Martha agreed. "But remember, he's just here temporarily. He'll move on when the work runs out." "Why?" "Because that is what cowboys do, sweetheart. They drift from place to place." Clara considered this seriously. "I think he should stay. Then you would smile more." Martha's breath caught. "I smile plenty." "Not like you did today." Clara yawned hugely. "You should smile like that all the time." Martha kissed her daughter's forehead and retreated to the main room, Clara's words echoing in her mind. Had she really been smiling? She tried to remember, but the day was already taking on a dreamlike quality, as if it had happened to someone else. Through the window she could see lamplight in the shed, and she imagined Yates arranging his few belongings in that bare space, making it home. Part of her insisted this was a mistake, that letting him stay would only lead to complications. But another part, a part that had been quiet for 2 years, whispered that maybe complications were not always bad things. Martha pulled her newly repaired coat from its peg and ran her fingers over the brown buttons, each one stitched with care by a man who had no reason to help her except simple human decency. She thought about the way he had carried Clara so gently, the way he had answered her daughter's endless questions without impatience, the way he had worked alongside Martha all afternoon, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She hung the coat back up and went to bed, but sleep was a long time coming. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that Martha had not known she needed. Yates worked around Lusk during the days, fixing roofs and fences and broken wagon wheels for anyone who would pay. In the mornings and evenings, he worked on Martha's property, sealing windows and reinforcing the porch and doing 100 small repairs that Thomas had left undone. Martha continued taking in sewing, but now when she hung the washing or prepared meals, there was someone to talk to besides Clara. Yates proved to be surprisingly good company, quiet when she needed silence but ready with conversation when she wanted it. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about learning to ride before he could walk, about his father's carpentry shop and his mother's garden. "What brought you out west?" Martha asked one evening as they sat on the porch while Clara played in the yard. November had deepened into true cold, and they both wore coats against the chill. Yates was quiet for a moment, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a horse for Clara. "My parents died of cholera 5 years back. My brother got the shop and the house, which was fair since he was older. I got $100 and the understanding that it was time to make my own way. That must have been hard. It was what it was. I've worked ranches from Missouri to Texas and back up to Wyoming. Saved some money, lost some money, learned a lot about cattle and even more about people." He glanced at her. "What about you? What made you leave Ohio, Thomas?" Martha smiled ruefully. "I was 19 and he was 22, and he had big dreams about making his fortune in the Western Territories. My father warned me that Thomas was all talk and no substance, but I thought I knew better. Young love makes fools of us all. You regret it." Martha looked at Clara, who was making her doll dance through the dirt. "I have Clara, so no, I cannot regret the path that led to her. But I wish Thomas had been more careful. I wish he had thought about us instead of just the money. I wish a lot of things." "Wishes don't keep you warm," Yates observed, echoing her earlier words about propriety. "No, they do not." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Martha was acutely aware of Yates beside her, solid and steady in a way Thomas never quite had been. It was not a fair comparison, she told herself. Thomas had been young and full of dreams, and those were not bad things. But neither were Yates's qualities, the groundedness and reliability that came from hard lessons learned. Clara brought her doll over and climbed into Martha's lap. "Mama, when is Christmas?" "About 3 weeks, darling." "Will St. Nicholas come even though Papa's gone?" Martha's chest tightened. Last Christmas, she had barely managed a few small gifts, and Clara was old enough now to notice how little they had compared to other children. "St. Nicholas does his best, but sometimes he has many children to visit and cannot bring everything we might wish for." Clara's face fell, and Martha felt like the worst mother in the territory. Before she could say anything else, Yates spoke up. "You know what I heard," he said to Clara. "I heard that St. Nicholas especially values children who are kind and helpful, even more than children who are rich. And I have seen you help your mama every single day. I bet you are very high on his list." Clara perked up. "Really?" "Absolutely. In fact, I would not be surprised if he brought something extra special to a girl as good as you." Clara hugged her doll tight and beamed, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Martha met Yates's eyes over her daughter's head and mouthed, "Thank you." He gave a small nod, then went back to his whittling. That night, after Clara was asleep, Martha counted the money in her tin box. She had $7.30, which needed to stretch until the end of January at least. Food was the priority, then firewood, then everything else. There would be nothing left for Christmas gifts, no matter what Yates had told Clara. Martha pressed her hands to her eyes and fought back tears of frustration. She wanted to give her daughter a real Christmas, the kind she remembered from her own childhood, with fresh oranges and peppermint sticks, and a new hair ribbon at the very least. But wanting and having were different things, and she had learned that lesson hard over the past 2 years. A soft knock on the door startled her. She quickly wiped her eyes and opened it to find Yates standing there with his hat in hand. "Sorry to disturb you," he said. "I saw your lamp still burning and thought you might want this." He held out a small cloth bag. "Got paid today for the church roof. This is your half, my half. I've been staying on your property and eating your food for 2 weeks now. That's worth something." "Our agreement was the repairs in exchange for the shed," Martha protested. Our agreement was that we would help each other, Yates corrected. This is me holding up my end. It's $3. Should help with Christmas maybe. Martha stared at the bag, pride and need warring inside her. I cannot take your money. It's not my money. It is your rent which you are owed. Yates. He closed her fingers around the bag. Martha, please, let me do this. His hand was warm over hers, calloused and strong, and Martha suddenly realized how close they were standing. She could see the exact color of his eyes, gray-blue with darker rings around the iris. She could see the small scar on his chin and the way his hair curled slightly at his collar. And she could see something in his expression that made her breath catch, something tender and careful and deeply sincere. Why? She whispered. Why do you care? Yates was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because you remind me that there are still good people in the world fighting to do right by those they love. Because your daughter has your eyes and his hair, and she deserves a Christmas that makes her smile. And because when I sew buttons onto your coat or fix your windows, I feel like I am building something instead of just drifting. Martha's eyes stung with tears she could not hold back this time. I do not know what to say. Say you will take the money and buy Clara something nice for Christmas. And you? What about something nice for you? I got something nice already, Yates said quietly. A warm place to sleep and good company and the best cornbread in Wyoming territory. I do not need anything else. He stepped back before Martha could respond, tipping his hat to her and heading back to the shed. She stood in her doorway clutching the bag of money, watching him go, and felt something shift inside her heart. Something that had been frozen solid for 2 years was beginning to thaw. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Martha woke before sunrise and lay in bed listening to Clara's soft breathing and thinking about Yates Quinlan. She had spent 2 years convinced that part of her life was over, that she would raise Clara alone and that would be enough. And it was enough, or at least it had been until a cowboy with storm-colored eyes had caught her when she stumbled and somehow kept catching her ever since. She was not ready for this. The very thought of opening her heart again terrified her. Thomas's death had nearly destroyed her, and she had survived by building walls and staying busy and not letting herself feel too much. Those walls had kept her safe, but they had also kept her alone, and she was only just beginning to realize how heavy that loneliness had been. Martha rose and dressed quietly, then started breakfast. She was stirring oatmeal when Yates knocked and entered, bringing cold air and the smell of hay with him. "Morning," he said. "Thought I'd get an early start on the chicken coop. It needs reinforcing before the snow comes." "There is oatmeal if you are hungry." I would not say no to that. They ate together as Clara slowly woke, the little girl stumbling out of the bedroom with her hair in tangles and her doll dragging behind her. She climbed into Yates's lap without hesitation, and he adjusted his arm around her as naturally as if she were his own child. The domesticity of the scene made Martha's throat tight. After breakfast, Yates went out to work on the chicken coop while Martha tackled her sewing. She had 3 dresses to hem and a shirt to repair, work that would earn her another $1 if she finished by week's end. Clara played at her feet, acting out elaborate stories with her doll. Around mid-morning, Mrs. Peterson arrived with a basket on her arm and curiosity in her eyes. She was a good woman, one of the few in Lusk who still gave Martha regular work, but she was also an inveterate gossip. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said warmly, "I hope I am not intruding. I wanted to drop off this fabric for the curtains we discussed." "Of course, come in." Martha ushered her inside and took the basket, pulling out nice quality muslin that would make fine curtains indeed. Mrs. Peterson's eyes went immediately to the window, where Yates could be seen working on the chicken coop. "I see you have help around the place. That is good." A property like this needs a man's hand." Martha bristled slightly but kept her voice level. "Mr. Quinlan is staying in my shed temporarily. He does repairs in exchange for the space." "Oh, I see. Very practical." Mrs. Peterson's tone suggested she saw rather more than Martha was saying. "He's the cowboy who has been doing odd jobs around town, is he not? I heard he fixed the Hendersons' leaking roof beautifully. He is skilled with repairs, yes. And single, I understand, though I suppose that is none of my business, Mrs. Peterson smiled in a way that absolutely made it her business. "Still, it must be nice to have a man around the place. For practical reasons, of course." "Of course," Martha echoed, forcing a smile. Mrs. Peterson stayed for another 10 minutes, fishing for information while Martha deflected as politely as possible. After she finally left, Martha closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted. Clara looked up from her playing. "Mrs. Peterson asks a lot of questions," the little girl observed. "She does indeed, sweetheart." "Do you like Mr. Quinlan, Mama?" Martha's heart stuttered. "What do you mean, like how Papa liked you? You told me once that Papa looked at you special and you looked at him special back. Do you look at Mr. Quinlan special, out of the mouths of babes?" Martha crossed to the window and watched Yates working, his movements efficient and sure. Did she look at him special? She was terribly afraid she did. "Mr. Quinlan is a friend," Martha said carefully. "And yes, I like him, but it is complicated." "Why?" "Because grown-up feelings usually are." Clara seemed satisfied with this non-answer and went back to her playing. Martha returned to her sewing, but her mind was far from the work. She thought about the way Yates listened when she talked, really listened, as if her words mattered. She thought about how safe she felt with him nearby, how the house seemed less empty. She thought about the gentleness in his hands when he held Clara and the careful way he had sewn those buttons onto her coat. And she thought about Thomas, about the promises they had made and the life they were supposed to have. Was it a betrayal to develop feelings for someone else? Or was it a betrayal to Clara to deny herself the possibility of happiness out of loyalty to a ghost? Martha did not have answers, so she pushed the questions away and focused on her stitching. But that night, when she brought Yates his supper in the shed because the temperature had dropped below freezing, she found herself lingering in the doorway. "You have made this quite comfortable," she observed, looking around at how he had arranged the space. His bedroll was neatly made in one corner, his few belongings organized on a shelf he had built, and he had even hung one of her old quilts across the window to keep out drafts. "It suits me fine," Yates said, accepting the bowl of stew. "Better than most places I have stayed. Most cowboys do not settle anywhere for long. No, they do not." He met her eyes. "I have been thinking about that lately, wondering if maybe drifting is just another word for running." "Running from what? Loneliness, I suppose. Connection. If you never stay anywhere long enough to care, you never have to risk losing anything that matters." He set the bowl down. "But that is a poor way to live, I am coming to understand." Martha's heart was beating too fast. "What changed your mind?" A woman who needed buttons for her coat. His voice was soft, almost wondering. "And her daughter who has questions about everything, and the feeling that maybe I have been drifting long enough." The air between them felt charged, full of words neither of them quite dared to speak. Martha knew she should leave, should go back to the safety of her house and her walls and her careful, controlled life. Instead, she heard herself say, "I am afraid. Of me, of this. Of feeling something again. Thomas's death nearly killed me, and I do not know if I am strong enough to risk that kind of pain again." Yates stood and crossed to her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I cannot promise you that life won't bring pain, Martha. Nobody can promise that. But I can promise that I am not Thomas. I am not reckless or careless. And I can promise that if you gave me the chance, I would spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust. We have only known each other a few weeks. I know. And if you need more time, I will wait. I will stay in this shed and fix things around your property and wait as long as you need. But I wanted you to know that what I feel for you is real. You're not just some woman who needed help. You are strong and brave, and you make me want to be the kind of man who stays. Martha's vision blurred with tears. I do not know what I feel yet. I just know that when you are here, the house seems less empty, and that terrifies me. Then we will start there, Yates said gently. With less empty, the rest can come in its own time. He did not try to touch her, did not push for more than she could give. He simply stood there, steady and patient, and Martha felt something in her chest unfurl like a flower toward the sun. I should go, she whispered. Clara will be wondering where I am. Sleep well, Martha. She fled back to the house, her heart pounding and her thoughts in chaos. That night she lay awake long after Clara had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to sort through the tangle of emotions in her chest. Fear, yes, but also something bright and fragile that she barely dared name. Hope. The days that followed took on a new quality, charged with an awareness that had not been there before. Martha found herself noticing small things about Yates. The way he rolled his sleeves up when he worked, exposing strong forearms marked with old scars. The way he hummed tunelessly under his breath when he was concentrating. The way his whole face softened when Clara showed him her latest drawing or the knot she had learned to tie. For his part, Yates seemed to be keeping his word about patience. He did not push or press, just continued his steady presence in her life. But Martha sometimes caught him looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch, tender and longing and carefully contained. Christmas drew closer, and Lusk took on a festive air despite the deepening cold. The church organized a caroling night, and Martha surprised herself by attending with Clara and Yates. They walked through town with the other families, their voices rising in songs that Martha had not sung since childhood. Clara rode on Yates's shoulders, her mittened hands gripping his hair, and several people gave Martha knowing looks that she tried to ignore. Let them talk, Yates murmured as they walked back toward her house, Clara drowsy between them. Their opinions do not matter. They matter when they affect Clara. Clara is happy and healthy and loved. That is what matters. Martha wanted to argue, but she was too tired and too content to start a fight. The evening had been lovely, and for a few hours she had felt like part of a real family again. That feeling lingered as they reached her house, and she found herself reluctant to let the night end. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" she asked. "I know it is late, but—" "I would like that," Yates said. They got Clara into bed, the little girl barely stirring as Martha tucked her in. Then they returned to the main room where Martha made coffee and they sat at her small table, the lamp burning low between them. "This has been a good night," Yates said quietly. "Thank you for letting me be part of it." "You are part of it," Martha said. "You have been part of things here for weeks now. I think if you left, Clara would be heartbroken." "And you?" His eyes met hers across the table. "Would you be heartbroken?" The honest answer was yes, but Martha was not quite ready to speak it aloud. Instead she said, "I would miss you very much." "That is a start." They talked for another hour, about small things and large, about dreams and disappointments, and the strange paths that had led them both to this moment. Martha found herself laughing more than she had in years, and once Yates reached across the table and covered her hand with his, just for a moment, and the warmth of his touch stayed with her long after he had gone back to the shed. A week before Christmas, Martha took her carefully hoarded money and went to the mercantile. She bought oranges and peppermint sticks for Clara, and a small tin of tea as a luxury for herself. She also purchased fabric to make Clara a new dress and materials to construct a simple rag doll. It was not much, but it would give her daughter a real Christmas, and Martha's heart felt lighter than it had in 2 years. As she was leaving, she nearly collided with Mr. Henderson. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said warmly. "Good to see you. I hope Clara is well." "She is, thank you." "And that cowboy who has been staying at your place, Mr. Quinlan. He is a good worker, fixed my roof better than new." Henderson hesitated, then added, "He was in here yesterday asking about rings." Martha's heart stopped. "Rings? Just browsing," he said, "but I thought you might like to know, seeing as how you two seem to have become close." Martha managed some sort of reply and escaped the mercantile, her thoughts whirling. Rings? What did that mean? Surely Yates was not thinking about marriage after only a few weeks. They had barely acknowledged their feelings. It was too soon, too fast. But even as she thought it, another part of her whispered that it did not feel too soon. It felt inevitable, as natural as the way dawn followed darkness. Yates had become woven into the fabric of her daily life so completely that she could not imagine it without him anymore. She walked home in a daze, and when she arrived, she found Yates building a sled for Clara out of old wood scraps. The little girl was supervising enthusiastically, making suggestions that Yates incorporated with good humor. "Look, Mama," Clara called. "Mr. Quinlan is making me a sled so we can go down the hill when the big snow comes." "That is wonderful, darling," Martha said, her eyes on Yates. He looked up and smiled at her, and something in her chest cracked wide open. That evening, after Clara was asleep, Martha did something she had not done in 2 years. She took out the small wooden box where she kept Thomas's ring and the few other mementos she had of him. She sat at her table and looked at the ring for a long time, remembering the young man who had given it to her and the promises they had made. "I will always love you," she whispered to the memory. "But I cannot live in the past anymore, and I think you would understand that. I think you would want Clara and me to be happy." She put the ring back in the box and closed the lid gently. Then she went to her door and looked out at the shed, where lamplight glowed through the window. Before she could talk herself out of it, she wrapped her coat around herself and walked across the cold yard. Yates opened the door at her knock, surprise crossing his face. "Martha, is everything all right? I have been thinking," she said, her breath puffing white in the freezing air. "About what you said, about feeling real and wanting to stay. And I am still afraid, but I am more afraid of wasting whatever time we have because I was too scared to take a chance." She stepped into the shed and Yates closed the door behind her. "I do not need grand gestures or promises you might not be able to keep. I just need honesty. So tell me true, Yates Quinlan. Are you staying in Lusk because you have nowhere else to go, or are you staying because of me?" He did not hesitate. "I am staying because of you. Because of you and Clara both. Because this place feels more like home than anywhere I have been in 5 years. Because when I think about the future, I do not see endless trails and temporary bunkhouses anymore. I see your house and your daughter's laughter and you beside me." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Henderson said you were looking at rings." "I was." Yates took a careful step closer. "Too soon, probably, but I wanted to know what they cost, what I would need to save. Because even if it takes a year or 5, I wanted to have something real to work toward. Does that make any sense?" "Too much sense," Martha said, and then she was in his arms, had crossed the space between them without conscious thought. Yates held her close, his heart beating steady beneath her cheek, and Martha felt safe in a way she had almost forgotten. "I am not ready for marriage yet," she said against his shirt. "I need time to be sure, to let Clara get used to the idea. But I am ready to stop pretending this is not happening. I am ready to admit that I care for you, that I am falling for you, maybe have been since you first sewed those buttons." Yates's arms tightened around her. "I can wait. I told you that and I meant it. We will go as slow as you need." They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other in the warmth of the shed while the wind howled outside. Eventually, Martha pulled back enough to look up at him, and Yates cupped her face in his hands with such tenderness that it made her ache. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Yes." He kissed her like she was precious, like he had all the time in the world, and Martha kissed him back with 2 years of loneliness and longing pouring out of her. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and Yates rested his forehead against hers. "You are extraordinary," he murmured. "Do you know that?" "I am ordinary," Martha corrected. "Just a widow trying to survive." "No, you are a woman who has survived and is still finding reasons to smile. You are strong and brave, and I am the luckiest man in Wyoming that you are giving me this chance." Martha kissed him again, softer this time, then reluctantly pulled away. "I need to get back before Clara wakes and finds me gone. But tomorrow, after she is asleep, come to the house. We need to talk about what this means, how we move forward. I will be there." Martha walked back across the yard, her lips still tingling and her heart full. When she slipped back into bed beside Clara, the little girl stirred and mumbled, "Mama, I am here, darling. Go back to sleep." "Did you tell Mr. Quinlan you love him yet?" Martha's breath caught. "What makes you think I love him?" "Because you look at him the same way you look at me, like he makes you happy." Clara yawned and burrowed deeper into the blankets. "It's okay if you love him, Mama. Papa would not mind. He wants you to be happy. He told me so in my dream." Martha's eyes filled with tears. She kissed her daughter's hair and whispered, "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just did not notice." Clara was already drifting back to sleep, and Martha lay beside her, marveling at the insight of children. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations for Christmas. Martha sewed Clara's new dress and finished the rag doll, working late into the nights while Yates did the same in his shed, constructing a doll bed from scrap wood. They had decided together to make Christmas special for Clara, pooling their limited resources and creativity. On Christmas Eve, Lusk held a service at the church, and Martha attended with Clara and Yates. They sat together in the pew, Clara between them, and when the congregation sang Silent Night, Yates reached over and took Martha's hand. She laced her fingers with his and held on, and it felt like a promise. After the service, as they walked home through the cold night with Clara chattering about St. Nicholas, Martha realized she was truly happy for the first time since Thomas died. It was not the same happiness she had known before, not the wild excitement of young love. This was deeper, steadier, built on friendship and shared struggles and genuine understanding. It was the happiness of knowing someone saw all of her, the strength and the weakness, the good days and bad, and chose to stay anyway. That night, after Clara was finally asleep, Yates came to the house as promised. They sat together on the settee, close enough that their shoulders touched, and talked about the future in concrete terms. "I want to stay in Lusk," Yates said. "Make it permanent. I have been saving money from the jobs around town, and I think by spring I could afford to rent the old workshop space near the livery, set up a proper carpentry and repair business. That would mean you are serious about staying. I am serious about you, and Clara, and building something real instead of just drifting." He turned to face her. "But I want to do this right, Martha. I want to court you properly. Let people see that my intentions are honorable. Give you time to be absolutely sure before we take any bigger steps. What about Clara? She is attached to you already if something were to go wrong. Then I would still be in her life if you allowed it, because she matters to me separate from my feelings for you, but nothing is going to go wrong." His voice was quiet but certain. "I am not going anywhere." Martha believed him. That was the remarkable part. She actually believed that this man who had drifted into town just weeks ago would keep his word, because everything he had done since they met had demonstrated exactly who he was, someone steady and true. "Then court me," she said. "Let us do this properly and see where it leads." Yates smiled, and it transformed his face from handsome to beautiful. "Starting when?" "Starting now. Starting with Christmas morning when you join us for breakfast. Starting with you taking supper with us every evening instead of eating alone in the shed. Starting with the whole town knowing that the widow Reynolds is being courted by Yates Quinlan." "I can do all of that," he said. "Then, may I kiss you again? I thought you would never ask." They kissed until the fire burned low and the cold crept in around the edges of the room. Eventually, Yates reluctantly pulled away, banking the fire and preparing to head back to the shed. At the door, he turned back and said, "Merry Christmas, Martha." "Merry Christmas, Yates." Christmas morning dawned bright and bitterly cold. Clara woke early, shaking Martha and squealing that St. Nicholas had come. Indeed, at the foot of the bed sat the new dress, the doll bed, oranges, peppermint sticks, and the wooden horse that Yates had been whittling for weeks. Clara's joy was incandescent, and she threw her arms around Martha's neck with such force that they nearly tumbled off the bed. "Mama, look. He brought so much. He remembered I was good. He did indeed, darling." They spent the morning playing with Clara's new treasures, and when Yates arrived for breakfast, the little girl launched herself at him, chattering about every gift and thanking him for the beautiful doll bed. "I think St. Nicholas might have had help," Clara said wisely. "I think maybe you helped him." "Maybe a little," Yates admitted, ruffling her hair, "but only because you were so very good this year." They ate a Christmas breakfast of eggs and bacon, a rare luxury, and sweet rolls that Martha had made the night before. Then they bundled up and took Clara out to try her new sled, spending the afternoon sliding down the hill behind the church with other families. Clara shrieked with laughter every time Yates sent the sled flying down the slope, and Martha stood at the top of the hill watching them and feeling her heart expand until it felt too big for her chest. Mrs. Peterson appeared at her elbow, wrapped in a fine wool coat. "Your Mr. Quinlan is very good with children." "He is," Martha agreed, not bothering to correct the "your." "He is also quite handsome in a rugged sort of way." "He is that too," Mrs. Peterson smiled. "I am happy for you, Martha, truly. You have had a hard road and you deserve some joy." "Thank you," Martha said, surprised and touched. "That means more than you know." As winter deepened into January and February, Yates made good on his plans. He rented the workshop space and spent his days building furniture and taking repair jobs. Word spread quickly that his work was excellent, and soon he had more commissions than he could fill. Martha's sewing business picked up as well, partly because of her own skill, but also because people wanted an excuse to stop by and observe the courtship between the widow Reynolds and the cowboy Quinlan, and it was a proper courtship. Yates called on Martha every evening, sitting in her parlor and talking while Clara played nearby. On Sundays, they attended church together and took walks around town, Yates offering his arm and Martha taking it. He brought her small gifts, nothing extravagant but thoughtful. A new thimble when he noticed hers was worn, a hair ribbon for Clara, a book of poetry that he thought Martha might like. For her part, Martha found herself opening up in ways she had not expected. She told Yates about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents and her sisters back east. She told him about the early days with Thomas, the good parts that she had almost forgotten in the grief and anger. And she told him about the fears that still woke her sometimes in the night, the terror that Clara might get sick again, or that winter would last forever, or that happiness was just something borrowed and soon to be taken back. "Fear is natural," Yates said one evening as they sat together after Clara had gone to bed. He had moved from the shed into a room at the boarding house once his business started earning steady money, propriety finally demanding it. But he still spent most of his free time at Martha's house. But fear does not have to be in charge. We can be afraid and still choose to live. When did you become so wise? Martha teased. I have always been wise. You just did not notice. Martha laughed, recognizing Clara's words from months ago. My daughter said the same thing to me once. She is a smart child, takes after her mother. They were sitting close together on the settee, and Martha leaned her head on Yates's shoulder. This had become their habit in recent weeks, these quiet moments after Clara slept when they could just be together without an audience. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. Tonight they did both. I have been thinking about the future, Martha said eventually, about what I want and what makes sense. She felt Yates tense slightly beneath her, and I think I am ready, not tomorrow, but soon. I think I am ready to marry you if you are still interested. Yates pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes searching her face. You are sure? Absolutely certain? I am sure that you have spent months proving yourself to be exactly who you said you were. I am sure that Clara adores you and that you are good to her. I am sure that when I think about the future, I want you in it. I am sure that I love you, Yates. The words came easier than she expected, smooth and natural. I love you and I want to be your wife. His smile started slow and then spread until it lit his whole face. I love you too. Have since the day you were so fierce about being able to manage on your own even though you clearly needed help. And yes, I am still interested in marrying you. I have been carrying this around for 2 weeks waiting for the right moment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a simple gold band, not fancy but well made and perfect for Martha's practical nature. It is not much, Yates said. But it is real, like everything else between us. And I promise you, Martha, I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of this, of you and Clara and whatever family we build together. Martha took the ring, her vision blurring with happy tears. It is perfect. You are perfect. I am definitely not perfect. Perfect for me then. He kissed her, deep and long and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Yates slipped the ring onto her finger and they both stared at it for a moment, the physical symbol of everything they had become to each other. When? Yates asked. When do you want to marry? Soon. March maybe, after the worst of the winter is past. Something simple at the church with whoever wants to attend. Martha laced her fingers with his. And then you can move out of the boarding house and into the house here. We will need to expand eventually, make more room for when our family grows. Our family, Yates repeated, wonder in his voice. I like the sound of that. They spent another hour making plans, talking about everything from where they would live to how they would combine their businesses to what they would name future children. It was all gloriously mundane and perfectly wonderful. And when Yates finally left for the night, Martha went to bed happier than she could remember being in her entire life. The next morning, she told Clara over breakfast that Yates had asked her to marry him, and that she had said yes. Clara's reaction was everything Martha hoped for. Shrieks of joy and jumping up and down, and 1,000 questions about when and where, and could she have a new dress for the wedding, and would she get to call Yates Papa now? If you want to call him Papa, I think he would like that very much, Martha said. But we can ask him when he comes for supper tonight. Clara could barely contain her excitement all day, and when Yates arrived that evening, she met him at the door with the question already bursting out. Can I call you Papa? Mama said I could if you say yes, so can I. Yates knelt down to Clara's level, his expression serious and tender. I would be honored if you called me Papa, Clara, but I want you to know something important. I am not trying to replace your first papa. He loved you very much, and he will always be part of who you are. I am just lucky enough to get to be your papa too if you will have me." Clara threw her arms around his neck. "I will have you. You are the best almost papa ever." Yates hugged her tight, and over Clara's shoulder his eyes met Martha's. The look they shared needed no words, just pure happiness and gratitude for the strange path that had led them all here. News of the engagement spread through Lusk faster than wildfire. People who had been watching the courtship with interest now came by to offer congratulations. Mrs. Peterson brought a beautiful lace tablecloth that had been her grandmother's. Mr. Henderson gave them a substantial discount on household supplies. Even Dr. Morrison, who Martha had avoided for 2 years over unpaid bills, stopped by to wish them well and quietly tell Martha that he was writing off what she owed him as a wedding gift. "You deserve happiness, Mrs. Reynolds," he said kindly. "And from what I have seen, Mr. Quinlan is a good man who will take care of you and Clara." The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of preparations. Martha sewed herself a new dress, not white but a beautiful deep blue that Yates said matched her eyes. Clara got the promised new dress too, in pink with ribbons. Yates worked with other men in town to add a room onto Martha's house, expanding it so there would be space for a larger family. Through it all, Martha felt like she was living in a dream. The darkness that had shrouded her for 2 years had lifted, and she could see color and possibility again. She still missed Thomas, still thought of him with love and a certain wistfulness for what might have been. But she was no longer living in the past, no longer just surviving each day. She was building a future, and it was glorious. The wedding took place on a bright March morning when the worst of winter had finally broken, and the first hints of spring touched the air. The church was full of people from Lusk, and Clara stood beside Martha as Yates came down the aisle looking impossibly handsome in a new black suit. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and Yates kissed Martha for the first time as her husband, Clara cheered loudly and the whole church laughed. At the reception afterward, held in the church hall with food contributed by half the town, Martha danced with her new husband while Clara danced with anyone who would partner her. As the evening wore on and Martha rested her head against Yates's chest, swaying to the music, she thought about the button that had started everything. "What are you smiling about?" Yates murmured into her hair. "Buttons," Martha said. "I was just thinking that I needed buttons for my coat, and somehow you buttoned yourself to my soul instead." Yates pulled back to look at her, his storm-colored eyes warm. "Is that such a bad thing?" "It is the best thing," Martha said honestly, "the very best thing that could have happened." He kissed her again, and around them the people of Lusk applauded and Clara danced in circles, and everything was exactly as it should be. Married life suited them both. Yates moved into the house, and suddenly everything Martha had been doing alone for 2 years became shared. He cooked breakfast while she handled sewing orders. She kept the books for his carpentry business while he maintained the house and property. They worked together, talked together, laughed together, and loved together, and Martha fell deeper in love with him every single day. Clara thrived too, having a father figure who adored her and gave her the attention and security she had been missing. She started calling Yates Papa without hesitation, and he treated her exactly like his own daughter. The first time Martha heard him tell Clara he loved her at bedtime, she cried happy tears in the next room. Spring turned to summer, and Martha discovered she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening after Clara was asleep, watching his face carefully for his reaction. What she saw there erased any lingering doubts she might have had. pure joy followed by tender concern. "Are you happy?" he asked, his hand going immediately to her still flat stomach. "Is it too soon?" "I am happy," Martha assured him. "Surprised but happy. What about you?" "I am happier than I knew it was possible to be." He kissed her softly. "A baby. Our baby. Martha, you have given me everything." Their son was born the following February, right in the middle of a snowstorm that reminded Martha of that long-ago November when Yates first came to Lusk. They named him Thomas, after Martha's first husband, and Yates held his namesake with tears in his eyes and told Martha that he was honored she trusted him enough to give their son that name. Clara was entranced by her baby brother, helping Martha care for him and singing him songs she made up. The house was full and loud and messy and absolutely perfect. 2 years later, a daughter came, and they named her Rose. And 3 years after that, another son they called James. The little house in Lusk expanded again and again to accommodate their growing family, and Yates's carpentry business thrived. Martha eventually had to stop taking in as much sewing because her hands were full with the children, but they managed well enough on Yates's income. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Martha and Yates stood on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Clara was 14 now, tall and beautiful and talking about becoming a teacher. Thomas was 9, James was 7, and Rose was 5, and they were chasing each other around with sticks pretending to be cowboys and outlaws. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Martha asked, leaning into Yates's side. "Some days it feels like forever in the best way. Like you have always been mine and I have always been yours." He wrapped his arm around her waist. "Other days I still cannot quite believe my luck that I wandered into Lusk that November and found you." "I found you," Martha corrected. "Or rather, my button did. Fell right into the dust and rolled away and you saw it happen." "Best button in the history of buttons," Martha laughed. "I still have that coat, you know, hanging in the back of the wardrobe. I could never bear to get rid of it, because of the buttons I sewed on. Because it reminds me that sometimes the smallest things lead to the biggest changes. I needed buttons, and instead I got a husband and a family and a whole life I never expected." Yates turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. The years had added some gray to his wheat-colored hair and lines around his eyes, but to Martha he was just as handsome as the day they met. "I love you, Martha Quinlan. Every single day I love you more. I love you too. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being patient with me when I was scared. Thank you for giving me this life. Thank you for letting me button myself to your soul." They kissed as the sun set over Wyoming and their children played, and the wind carried the scent of spring. It was an ordinary moment in an ordinary life, which made it extraordinary in its own way. They had built something real and lasting from the rubble of loss and loneliness, and that was worth more than all the gold in California. That night, after the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Martha retrieved the gray coat from the wardrobe. She showed it to Yates, pointing out the brown buttons he had sewn on so carefully all those years ago. "They are still holding strong," he observed, examining his work. "Of course they are. You sewed them on. You build things to last. I try." He handed the coat back to her. "Are you going to keep it forever? Maybe. Or maybe someday I will give it to Clara or Rose, along with the story of how their papa sewed buttons for their mama and stayed to build a life." Martha folded the coat carefully. "Either way, I am keeping it. It is part of our history. Then it should definitely be kept." They went to bed in the room they shared, the room that had once been Martha's alone when she was just a widow trying to survive. Now it was full of laughter and love, and the comfortable intimacy of two people who knew each other completely. As Martha drifted off to sleep in Yates's arms, She thought about Clara's words from long ago, that Papa would want her to be happy. She was happy. Deeply, fundamentally, joyfully happy. The kind of happy that came from building something real with someone true. The kind of happy that lasted. Outside, Wyoming wind rattled the windows that Yates had sealed years ago, but inside the house, everything was warm and safe and whole. The widow who had needed buttons for her coat had found so much more than thread and needle could provide. She had found love, partnership, family, and home, and it had all started with a single button falling into the dust and a cowboy kind enough to notice. Years continued to pass in their gentle, inevitable way. The children grew, and the family Yates and Martha had built together flourished. Clara eventually did become a teacher, taking a position at the Lusk schoolhouse and bringing pride to her parents with her intelligence and compassion. Thomas followed his father into carpentry, showing a natural talent for the work. Rose proved to be artistic, spending hours drawing and painting the Wyoming landscape. And James, the youngest boy, surprised them all by developing a passion for medicine after doctor. Morrison took him on as an apprentice. Through it all, Martha and Yates remained the steady center of their growing family. Their love, which had begun tentatively and carefully, had deepened into something unshakable. They still had their routines, still worked side by side, still sat together on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party. The house was full of friends and family, including Martha's sister, who had finally made the journey from Ohio to meet the man who had captured her sister's heart. The evening was full of laughter and stories, and when someone asked Martha to tell the story of how she and Yates met, she obliged. "I was a widow with a sick child and a coat missing buttons," she began, and everyone leaned in to listen. "And this cowboy appeared out of nowhere and helped me carry Clara home. Then he gave me medicine for her fever, bought me buttons, and sewed them onto my coat with his own hands. I thought he was just being kind, doing his good deed before moving on to the next town. But he stayed," Clara said, smiling at Yates. "He stayed," Martha agreed. "And he kept staying day after day until staying became permanent, until this became his home and we became his family." "Best decision I ever made," Yates said, pulling Martha close. "Well, second best. The best was asking her to marry me." "The best was her saying yes," Thomas corrected, and everyone laughed. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the house was finally quiet, Martha and Yates walked through rooms full of evidence of the life they had built. Photographs on the walls, children's drawings, Yates's carefully crafted furniture, Martha's quilts. Every inch of the house told their story. "You ever regret it?" Martha asked as they prepared for bed. "Taking a chance on a widow and her daughter instead of moving on to the next town?" Yates looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Regret finding the love of my life and gaining a family. Regret finally understanding what home means. Martha, marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did. Not a day goes by that I don't thank God for that button falling into the dust." "Just the button," Martha teased. "The button, and you and Clara and this whole impossible, wonderful life we have made." He cupped her face in his hands, those same strong hands that had sewn buttons so long ago. "I love you. I will always love you, and I would choose you again and again in every lifetime." Martha kissed him, pouring 20 years of love and gratitude into it. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his and whispered, "Thank you for buttoning yourself to my soul. Thank you for letting me." They were older now, their hair more gray than gold and brown, their faces marked by time and laughter and the occasional hardship. But their love was as strong as ever, maybe stronger for having weathered storms and celebrated joys together. They had built something lasting, something real, something worth every risk and every leap of faith, and it had all started with buttons. As Martha drifted off to sleep that night, safe in her husband's arms and surrounded by the family they had created, she thought about the woman she had been that November day 20 years ago. Frightened, angry, barely holding on with a sick child and a coat missing buttons. That woman would never have believed she could be this happy again, but life had surprised her. A cowboy with storm-colored eyes and steady hands had surprised her, and she had surprised herself by being brave enough to love again. The last thought Martha had before sleep took her was that she would need to tell her grandchildren this story someday, when they were old enough to understand. She would tell them about buttons and cowboys and taking chances. She would tell them that love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that healing was possible even when you thought your heart was broken beyond repair. She would tell them that their grandmother had needed buttons for her coat, and their grandfather had buttoned himself to her soul instead, and from that simple act of kindness had grown a love that lasted forever. And it would be true. Every single word of it.